Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
Hello. Welcome back to the Weekly Download, brought to you by Big Games Machine. I'm back.
Yes, you're back. Welcome back, Tom.
Yeah, I know.
You always welcome everybody else back.
Alex,
I thought it was time for you to be welcome.
Welcome everyone else back. I say, Alex, thank you for stepping in last week and being a great host. I was very, very happy with the job you did, but now I'm here. I've just come to your door and wrestled back.
I was simply a conduit for your thoughts, Tom. Simply a conduit for you.
You were a very good one, though. You were very good. You know, it was a good episode, but we're back again with some more stories.
I will apologise once again, and I'm still not going to take a run at the name. I'm really bad at pronunciations. I blame the dyslexia, but I think I butchered the guy who made Eugenics' name. So if by any chance anybody listens to this and they know how it's pronounced, and it's like there's a load of names like that I hear other people do on podcasts, like when they do John Riccatello's name wrong or people like that, and I'm like, how do you not know? And then I went and did not just.
Everyone's asking that about you.
Yeah, something even worse, because I don't think I was even close with my pronunciation of the name. So apologies.
Well, hopefully this week we should be okay with the names. We're going to be taking a look at Guy Mowbray, who's one of the commentators for EA Sports FC. We're going to be taking a look at a story involving him. We've also got some more news about ByteDance and Moonton Technology. And then we'll also be looking once again, I think 3 weeks out of 4 since
3
it
weeks
came
in a
out.
row.
We're looking at Highguard. No Ubisoft this week though, but hopefully all those names will be really easy. And then as always, we'll have a few stories at the end, but we'll be back in a second to start with our first story of the day. So we're going to start today's episode by taking a look at the story surrounding football commentator Guy Mowbray, who this week has revealed in an interview that EA are replicating his voice as part of the EA Sports FC commentary track using AI. Now, this is something, Alex, that we've discussed before we started. We're both cynical to a lot of uses of AI, but this is one where we've had the conversation and we think this is actually quite interesting. One of the things that Guy Mowbray has spoken about in this interview is that he has to record names for over 20,000 players. And within that, it's not just a case of saying the player's name once, it's in the context of passing the ball or scoring a goal or making a last-minute tackle. So you have to keep repeating these names and different sentences in so many different contexts because that's how a football game can go. There's so many different outcomes. So with his explicit permission, EA is using an AI tool to handle a lot of this repetitive name reading, which essentially is removing some of the manual labor involved in reciting those names, those thousands of names time and time again in so many different ways. So I'm going to open up the floor. Now we've had some context. Alex, I know we have discussed this, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this.
I have so many thoughts, but I do think, and I'm not a huge fan of replacing creative works and creative elements with AI in any way, shape or form, but they are very specific that a lot of the creative lines, a lot of those readings remain in his hands and it is just the voices and tweaking that. And I think things like that make a lot of sense for both that and also callbacks. Like it's never hugely expensive, but especially when you start getting into working with more famous people, like finding the time to call people back and getting them in to do the recordings. Although my understanding now is that a lot of people that regularly do voice acting just have small studios in their homes to do it. But
obviously in this case, Guy Mowbray and then Sue Smith, who's his co-commentator, they're both full-time commentators and football pundits. So the saving of the time in this specific scenario does make so much sense.
Absolutely. The number of names they've got to read, and if there's any problems with there. And I think there's a lot of cases where it makes sense. Like I was saying, having callbacks to do re-record voice lines. Because, you hear about games that's we had the story kind of in one place and we had all these lines. And then, famously, Peter Dinklage, they couldn't call back for Ghost to do stuff. And they had to get somebody else in
So
and
was that
redo all of that.
Destiny, I think? Was that Destiny?
Yeah. So, freeing elements like that, I think the important thing is that the contracts reflect that. Like, I've long had this kind of idea in my head for like what those contracts would look like for them to be fair. Not that it's anything I deal with, but like maybe voice actors who get paid 20% more if they're like a lead role, and then, they get a certain percentage of their lines that are able to be percentage of their voice in the game that could be AI'd if necessary, rather than doing a callback. So they get money in pocket while at the same time giving the studio a little bit of flexibility to do like unimportant lines, unimportant, but you know what I mean? So it's a real, it kind of oscillate back and forth. But I think the important part of this is that Guy Mowbray and probably more famous people have the sway and pull to do this. And it does ensure that, they don't have to do the monotonous reading of everybody's voice, or, perhaps somebody like Nolan North or Troy Baker don't have to do like massively stressful screams over and over again. They can record it once or twice and then have that edited to save their vocal cords for general line reads and elements like that, where it makes sense.
Whenever we have this, whenever we speak about things like this, it is always, I feel like you have to wade through the mud per se so carefully, because I think there is so much nuance here. But the point you've raised about like the screaming, for example, that's something that Sue Smith highlights in this article, is that if you're recording for 4 or 5 hours, if you're recording over a few months, it's quite plausible that over that time, whether it's across the day from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m., or if you're recording in June and then October, your voice can change entirely. And then you lose in that consistency, which if it ends up in the game, we know people would complain about, which is the flip side of this.
And it's interesting because a lot of the time, like once you start watching movies and like you get like a reverse shot of somebody and then their voice comes up and you realize it's ADR, and it's like they've recorded it and they've tried to tweak it so it sounds like it did at the time, even though it's recorded in a completely different space. All these other factors, like you say, time of year, they could, like, if it was allowed and it was in the contract and the people get the money that they deserve for having done the rest of the performance, and I shouldn't supersede any of that. Absolutely. But if they could just AI it and it sound better, both for movies and for games, then maybe it does make sense. Maybe there is room there. But again, not to keep going around in a circle, but the challenge is, what does that mean to the smaller artists who are coming in, who don't have that clout, who don't have the name recognition, who don't have the
protection
that
this does bring? Yeah, I think, I've been very clear. If you listen to episodes in the past, I think I've been very clear about my stance on a lot of this. I think this is really interesting because it's one of those things that really could set the precedent. EA have been very clear in when they've discussed their use of AI in examples such as this. It's a collaboration. They're not replacing anyone. But my question and my response to that is, we don't know how this could evolve. And the point that you've made about, you can, if you're a big name, whether that's as a voice actor or a football commentator or even just a big celebrity voice that's coming into a game, you do have that protection where you can very much decide in these kind of situations what you will and won't stand for. I feel like I keep saying the flip side, but the other side of this is, as you've said, Alex, if you're a really young up-and-coming voice actor, you've not had many roles before, this, to me, I don't think you'd look at this
sign the wrong contract, like that just has a bit more percent or a little more leeway, or the sequel they can just AI you, or they can do it, maybe not that, but maybe a DLC that suddenly you're entirely voiced in, and you're not getting your, what's it called when you get paid, residuals and things off
like
that.
Royalties.
I don't think there is royalties. Yeah, you don't get kind of the extra cash for that. Obviously,
yeah, I mean, that's the moral side of things, isn't it? I think the last thing I'd say before we move on is,
I had
there's
one more
the morality
thing before we move on,
aspect. Alex has one more thing. My last thing would just be, there's the morality aspect to this. I think the other angle of this is, as far as I can tell, no one has spoken about this being a thing until this week. There's not been uproar in the games community where people have gone, oh, it's clear that this is not actually Guy Mowbray talking. This is someone else. And I don't know if that is because it's commentary in a football game, so you don't focus on the voice. You're focusing on playing the game, whereas you'd notice in a really story-heavy game. But as far as I can tell, this isn't something that players have been aware of, which is a bit scary. But it definitely
Was this
definitely
for the
points
last
to the
one or
fact
the next
that
one? Sorry, I realise as you're saying this, I assumed this was for the next game. It was this EA
I
Sports
know
FC.
this is for this year's entry.
Oh wow,
that's
okay,
come out. So
okay.
yeah,
I mean, maybe that just
that's
shows
what's
that it
funny
goes
to
well.
me is yeah,
'Cause, I mean,
that is what's funny is
They always felt a
people
bit
haven't noticed.
disjointed. They always felt a bit disjointed if you were listening carefully, and maybe this has actually smoothed that out in a way that actually helps. Because it is again just the name reads. The point that I was going to say is that in the article it reads very much like it was just Guy. I'm not sure if that was the case. I don't know how they came to this conclusion. Like, there's all sorts of things that might have led to it. Like, it could be anything from like he was like 200 names into the voice read and his voice just gave out and he had to save his voice for this, and we were like, we'll just do it with AI.
Use the
and
robot.
he was like, yeah, go
Use the
for it.
robot.
It's like there's I'm like almost this a trial to see if it was something, because the fact that it seems to just be one, and granted this was I think it originated from a BBC article, so maybe there are other reads from like the La Liga and things like that were other people for each country. I don't know if he was the only person that did it, but I do wonder how much of it was a trial to see if it was noticed, if it was ultimately good or ultimately bad. Just from the way that
all I'll say,
the articles I read are written.
the classic wait and see. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? And see where this goes. But no, interesting stuff. Like we've both said, we've both had strong takes on things like this before, so it might be a surprise that we seem to be banging the AI drum quite a bit in this case, but it's not necessarily that. I think this is just a really interesting use of the technology, and if any, out of all the stuff that I've seen, this is one where I do look and think, I get why, and it doesn't just read to me as it's a cost-cutting exercise. This I do think it makes sense, which I don't tend to think, so... Well, with me making sense of something, we'll wrap up here, and when we come back, we're going to be taking a little look at ByteDance and Moonton Technology. And we're back with our second story. We're going to move from, actually ironic that we're speaking about EA, but we're going to be moving on to this story, which is a potential big money play from Savvy Games Group, who are rumored to be acquiring Moonton Technology of Mobile Legends Bang Bang fame from ByteDance, who of course are the parent company of TikTok. The deal is estimated to be around $6 to $7 billion, which my lovely co-host Alex has handily noted that this is more than Scopely was previously acquired for, which was just under $5 billion. So we're seeing that, not necessarily inflation of a few years on, but we're seeing that jump in terms of the cost of these acquisitions.
It's hard to know because you only get the kind of like how much are they when the valuation comes. So the two metrics we have, but I will say, and Scopely obviously was always very heavily into licensed game, had a lot of very big games, but their biggest being Monopoly, which came out and has dominated the mobile charts for a long time now, came out after the acquisition. In some respects, maybe the value of Scopely was perhaps a little under what it was destined to be just 6 months later when Savvy put in their bid.
The first time in my life I'd ever say that $4.9 billion feels like a bit of a bargain. But
in that case,
it does. But we can't start speaking about Monopoly Go, but it is a very good deal. But it is really interesting that I think there's a few angles to this. I think one of them is obviously, with the context of the Scopely acquisition as well. We're seeing Savvy Games Group potentially pick up another really big player in the mobile space. Another good note that Alex has had, but they've got Moonton has more of a foothold in Asia. Mobile Legends is huge. The esports scene there is enormous. It's kind of the cornerstone of esports in Southeast Asia, which again, we've seen as part of the wider Saudi Arabian strategy around gaming, we are seeing such a heavy focus on esports. So that's the kind of ripple there. I think what else is really interesting for me is that this seems to be an indication that ByteDance are looking at everything that their kind of big portfolio and thinking, we might be making money from Moonton, but are we better off offloading them? And then we're just going to focus on our social media and AI. Maybe that's part of the reason why they're doing this. Maybe someone waving $7 billion potentially in front of you might help as well. But I think there's a few different sides to this. It seems like a good deal to everyone involved in this, I think, potentially.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting move. I think it really kind of also cements Savvy as focusing a lot on mobile by the look of it, given that the other things they've got. Yes, they were gifted from the PIF, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, their shares in Nintendo, Capcom, and Nexon recently.
Amongst
I think that
others.
was about amongst others. I think
there's a lot, isn't there?
But EA, going back to the earlier point, while that is being purchased, it doesn't look like that's falling under Savvy. That remains part of the PIF, so a separate kind of deal on there. So it does leave you wondering, like, okay, is Savvy going to be focused on esports and mobile? Is this their kind of, as we mentioned, their kind of gateway more in to Asia? Because obviously, they being in the Middle East, they kind of are split between the two. So, they have sensibilities, I imagine, from both in terms of the games they enjoy. So, yeah, I mean, I actually, we were out at China Joy last year and we got to go and see Moonton, and they have a long history. There's a lot of games they put out. Mobile Legends Bang Bang is obviously probably the biggest, but, Mobile Legends Adventures and a host of others along that path are also in there. So they've got this deep catalogue, but we kind of see it time and again with these big games that it's hard to iterate and make another success as big as that. So there's also the question, has Moonton kind of hit its peak and now it's kind of like maybe they get another big one and they're successful, or is it going to be,
or they just
kind of
keep putting more and more into Mobile Legends?
Exactly.
Bang, bang. I think it's interesting you bring that up, because for anyone who's new to the podcast, one of the things we run alongside the weekly download podcast is we have our daily newsletter. Look forward to that plug at the end, as always. But one of the stories I picked up today for today's edition was around I can't recall what they're called now. I think it's Starbreeze, the developer of Payday.
Yes.
And your point around this idea that you release a game and it does really, really well, and then you release another one, and all of a sudden Starbreeze have ended up in a situation where they've made Payday 3 and they've kind of gone, oh, hang on, that's not making any money. Everyone's still playing Payday 2. Why are people doing this? So it does make me, it's a good question of what, if this does go through, what would the strategy be? Is it a case of making a new game? Is it a case of trying to use the IP in different ways? Or is it looking and thinking, we want the esports element that this brings, but we also want to take what's already there with this particular game and just multiply it and keep focusing on that and just take the revenue we can get from that. I'm not in the room. To quote Hamilton, I'm not in the room where it happens, so I don't know. But yeah, I think it's the point that you've made, Alex, about we're seeing a lot of the esports things move to the Middle East. We're seeing with the PIF as well, we're seeing that concentration of a lot of companies and a lot of stakes within companies. Yeah, I don't know what the question is here, but it's interesting to me. It feels like that traditionally the West and the East have been those two big pillars of video games for pretty much not at this point, it's quite a long history, but for the entire shortish history of the industry. And now it feels like we're seeing a third prong potentially appear on the trident.
I will, in terms of like talking about like all the money they're worth and what have you, what you can probably say is both of the acquisitions we're discussing in terms of Scopely and this were safe bets. I mean, mobile remains the kind of growth, and these are both companies with established brand you can continue to work within and still see probably some small growth as the industry continues to evolve, with any new products being kind of like bonus on top of that. So it does feel, yeah, well, while it sounds like a lot, they're probably some of the safer bets in that range, possibly safer than something like EA, where the development costs of a single game are so high that it has to succeed.
Well, for now, but not
that
if
takes you into
Guy
a whole
Mowbray has
conversation
anything
about
to do with it. But no, I'm not calling out Guy like that. It's not his decision. But no, that's true. I think it does make a lot of sense. I think if you're going to take those, as we've seen a lot of consolidation. We've seen a lot of the big companies who have a lot of capital. As we've spoken about on previous episodes, we've seen a lot of those companies beginning to hoard that capital in order to figure out where the safer bets are. And we've had those years where it felt a bit like if you had a half decent idea, someone out there would chuck a load of money at it. And now we're in a situation where that's just not the case. So this just feels like a reflection of that. I think with that, we'll wrap here, and then we'll come back and we'll have another conversation about Highguard. And wrapping up today's lineup, we're going to be taking another look at Highguard, which I know we've spoken about a few times since it came out. But this time, rather than looking at the low player counts or layoffs, we're actually going to be looking at a few reports that have emerged this week that claim that Tencent, via a subsidiary, partially funded the game. Now, the report initially came from Stephen Totillo, who is a great journalist, so I think we can kind of trust this one, who has alleged that Wildlight Entertainment, the developer of Highguard, was secretly backed by the Chinese tech giant. Obviously, we know that Tencent have got their, to use one of my favorite British phrases, they've got their fingers in a lot of pies in the industry, so they're involved in a lot of things. Neither company disclosed this partnership. We don't know how much, we don't know how long the deal was, and we don't know why it was kept a secret. I'll open up the floor to you in a second, Alex, but I would just say I don't think this is some sensationalist story of deceit and a company lying to people. I very much think this was to make sure they could take advantage of the independent indie angle that I think they wanted to try and use during the reveal and the launch.
That's interesting take, and possibly right. Like, it depends on where you see this coming from, because I haven't read the article on this one, to be clear, unlike Guy Mowbray, which I versed myself in comprehensively before diving both feet into that. So the idea that it's secret, I don't know if that's like secret, like it wasn't disclosed in financials, or, if it's more a case, or it was like tucked away somewhere, or if they just didn't put out a press release. And, to Tencent, they could be sat there going like, well, maybe it's like very little money. It's like, we put out press releases when we spend $1 billion, not when we drop $1 million.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's just, this isn't a big deal. I think the fact that it's via a subsidiary as well kind of justifies your point. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because, I mean, you sit there and like, we occasionally have to put out things about partnerships, and it's like, well, if it's not over $1 million, if it's not over 2 million, like, it's not going to get covered. That's likely not true with Tencent, to be fair, but generally, like, big numbers get more coverage. So, maybe it was a case of like they didn't feel the value was there. Like you say, maybe there was a sense from the Highguard team that they wanted to keep some level of kind of authenticity to it. What I think would be really interesting is this a strategy? Like, not the keeping it a secret part, but kind of
the funding.
taking a load of smaller bets. We're not going to announce that we're putting out $1 million to 20 games, taking a lot of small stake bets for Tencent on many, many games. And like, if one pops off and you've got your foot in the door with like the next big game, especially when you look at where the studio came from, like they're ex-Apex Legend devs, which puts them as kind of and Titanfall.
Don't forget.
My point being,
gone but not forgotten.
Apex Legends being one of the bigger
100%
games still going out there. Like, maybe if you went round, you checked out other small studios that come out of the back of it. Like, I'm just picking a name out of the air because I was listening to something about BioShock the other day. But like, if Ken Levine's studio is getting backing for their new game from Tencent, just in case that blows up, probably not, because that's going to be narrative heavy, and I'd imagine Tencent's going to be, if they're looking for something to blow up, they're probably putting it into multiplayer games. But yeah, I think there's probably a number of paths as to why this wasn't widely announced. Whether that makes it a secret, I don't know.
Yeah. I think I made the point before. I think that as soon as you say like it's no one knew about this and it feels really sneaky, it just that I don't think that's the case. I think you're on the money in terms of we probably underestimate just how many of these kind of things that Tencent are doing. It makes so much sense for them to look. Tencent are in a position, they've got their core games that they publish, that they develop, that they make X amount of money from. They're in a place now where they can go out and say, this concept that so-and-so is working on this, let's go and bung them X amount of money, let's see how it goes. I don't think there's anything more to it than that. I think people would probably be surprised by how much of this kind of thing that Tencent are doing. We just don't know, because at the moment, Highguard is the game that everyone's dogging on, and that's the one that people care about. And I feel that this potentially will, not that Stephen is doing this for the record, but I think this is something where people will look at it and use it as another stick to beat the game with, which kind of feels a bit pointless at this point. I think the bigger question and the bigger point is that I don't think we'll know the ins and outs of maybe why Highguard didn't hit the way people wanted it to right now, but I think it shows that even with whatever the amount of backing is from Tencent, even with money from Tencent, even from with a leadership team who are veterans within this industry, as you've said, have developed some critically acclaimed games. Like, people love the Titanfall series, people love Apex Legends even years after they've come out. It was still pretty much impossible for Highguard to establish itself out of the door, and we've seen in the weeks that followed mass layoffs at the team. There's now pretty much a skeleton crew to maintain it. So even with what from the outside you'd consider to be a pretty perfect scenario to release something in, it's just not worked. And the point you made in our last story where we're talking about safe bets, you would have thought this was potentially a fairly safe bet, especially if the cost for Tencent isn't that high. But it's really struggled.
I mean, there's a whole story about like them showing Jeff Keighley the game and it being part of the Game Awards, and that like boosting awareness, and arguably maybe damaging it more because they didn't organically grow as they may have otherwise found an audience that liked it. Repair or not repair, but improve systems as it grows. And what they instead ended up with was massive interest from people that were only tangentially aware of it and kind of all feeding in. But then the flip side of that is that Apex Legends, I know we use it repeatedly as their kind of touch point for this, one because of the team, but also it released out of nowhere with very little build. Like my recollection is people were called to like a gameplay test, I think in New York.
Yeah, there was like a creator event.
Yeah, creator and
before,
media were all invited, and then basically as they were playing, it's like any questions they were asking, like, oh yeah, it's out now. Like we hit launch kind of as you guys walk through the door kind of situations. But what they had off the back of that, of course, was not just EA's marketing, but EA's social platforms, Titanfall's platforms, that existing audience, that way of reaching people. And Highguard didn't have that foot in the door. Like, I do wonder how much that damaged it in terms of the expectations people put against where it should be out of the gate. I think had it been handled differently and it not had this weird kind of like, get out there and impress everybody kind of idea behind it, it might have been in a very different situation and grown in kind of to just pull a game out of Valheim kind of way that kind of like it garnered support from what was good about it
over time. And
yeah, people came to it for what was good without some expectation. But we've moved way off the topic of Tencent.
No, but I think that's a really valid point, and I think that actually that's quite a good. I think it brings us full circle, because I think, to me, if before this game had come out, they were going on record about how Tencent believed in the idea and Tencent had invested in it, it would have been even worse. So,
yeah,
it's one of those things where it makes sense, where they've kept quiet about this. I imagine, like with anything, more details might emerge about this in the future. But I think the crux of this entire topic is that don't be surprised by the idea that Tencent is chucking money out there at things, and that they're not talking about it because, as you've said, Alex, it's not that it's not relevant to them, but they've got so many things to focus on that the idea of, say, if they've even given 10 million in this situation, that's, to them, that's pretty much nothing. So they're not going to be shouting and then screaming about this because it was a little bet for them.
If the game did really well, I bet Tencent would do a lap of honor at how well they called it. In this case, they probably do.
Oh yeah. In this one, it'll just be like, we'll add that to the bottom of the financial report, and then never speak about it again. And I think on the note of not speaking about it again, we'll wrap here, and then we'll come back with this week's rapid rundown, and we'll run through a few of the more fun stories we've seen this week.
Bet you we talk about Highguard again soon, though.
And now it's time for this week's Rapid Rundown. We've got 3 stories to rapidly run through. The first of which is another example of a indie studio branching out and opening a publishing arm. This time we've got DevCat, who I can't recall the name of the series now, but they have a series of games where you have to like spot the cats in different environments, and a lot of they're very open about the fact that they do a lot of work for like animal rescue and animal conservation and these kind of things. And they're now
Full
opening
of Cats, for anybody that wants
Full of Cats.
For anybody wants, yeah.
There we go. They're now opening a publishing branch to support like-minded indie developers who are working on so-called cozy and wholesome projects with marketing, localization, and game direction. And we've seen quite a few of these studios where they might not be making the most money in the world, but they're using the success that they've had to try and put the ladder down and bring up other studios, which I think is really nice to see. And it just gives alternative options for developers without having to go to the more corporate and the more corporate publishers where things are a bit more stringent and difficult to get through, I imagine.
Absolutely. And I wonder what in-house talent they have. Like it's interesting to think of, and it's only as you're saying it that it kind of sprang to mind. But you've probably got a marketing, if they've got like marketers, PR people, and social community people there. I don't know if that's going to be like it will be a full-time job, but I mean, if Full of Cats keeps them absolutely 100% occupied, and maybe that's something where it's like, okay, we're going to help these guys, maybe give them some funding, but essentially offload all these bits, bring them in-house where we have that talent already. Like you're seeing a lot. I think it was Pixel Doors we were talking about last week, which was a new small studio where the developers get paid first, and then only after like they've recouped their money does the publisher start to see some of that. So they're incentivized to bring that money in, and we're just seeing a lot of new these ways of marketing.
It seems like very reactionary to not to put the blame at anyone's doors, but if people are struggling to make deals, and it seems like we're seeing quite a lot in the last 4 or 5 months where, like I said before, a lot of smaller studios are looking and saying, hey, if we can help people out, let's try and do it. We don't know how this will go, but yeah, a lot of smaller teams are going, let's try this. Now, from smaller teams to Square Enix, not a small team, quite big, I imagine. A lot of people working on their games. Really interesting story this week about the Final Fantasy VII Remake director talking about the so controversial game key cards on the Switch 2, and a lot of people have time and time again with Ubisoft as well come out and been like, come on, like put these games on like a cartridge. Why are we doing this odd half-baked solution? They've come out in this case and said, if you want these games on the Switch 2, Nintendo have given us this tool so we can do it. Because I think some of the reasoning is that we can't do installs in the way that if you're playing on PS5 and you put the disc in, the disc is still essentially acting like a key because the game installs on the console from the disc. You can't do that on the Switch 2 with a cartridge. So that's the way around it. So we can load the game, so we can stream the assets in. So it's either you get a game key card in most cases, or you don't get the games. And I think it's interesting to get that reasoning from the people making the games, because it kind of answers a lot of the questions and the speculation.
I mean, I understand. My biggest frustration with it as a concept is that I, having barely played my Switch 2, but like a place that I would be more likely than you'd think to pick it up would be a game would be at an airport. Like, I'm about to fly. Maybe I do want to go and pick something up, and putting it in and having no way to get it from here to here without the internet, obviously. But I mean,
I think
why everybody
has
has the internet basically at this stage anyway. Like, I feel like we're moving beyond that.
I think it's why people, we'll move on to the last story soon, but I've seen a lot of people criticize the designs of these cases for being like, why are they explaining it? It's right there on the box, and they make the boxes look really ugly. And I think this is what you've just said, not that you'd make this mistake, but I think Nintendo are kind of still being haunted by the Wii U era of people thinking it was a peripheral. And they're like, look, if you get a game key card, you ain't doing anything unless you've got the internet. So do not do it unless you've got the internet. But you do make a valid point. I think it's also an issue because of the cost of storage as well. I'm looking to try and get an Express SD card for mine, because I've picked up I've picked up Final Fantasy VII Remake, Dragon Quest. I've got a few key cards now, and Final Fantasy VII was 90 gigabytes, and you very quickly eat through that storage when you're not using cartridges. But it's a reality of the technical side of things that you need to use key cards in most cases, otherwise the game won't run. So you can't do much about it.
I mean, I live almost entirely digitally now anyway, so it doesn't affect me. But
heathen,
you keep the advantages of the fast access and the ability to trade it and retain the value that way, which is people's worry about the digital market. Like, yes,
I think it
still means that people can turn off. It still means somebody somewhere can turn off a server at some point, and you no longer have access to that card. But that's the separate
that's
issue.
Steam as well, though, isn't it? I think the question of preservation is a concern.
And the rapid rundown went directly off the rails.
12-hour talk about Steam and preservation. But no, I'll wrestle things back. Our last little story for this week's section is so Matthew Ball, who's a quite well-known industry analyst, has come out in an upcoming report that you can get early access to, like a game on Steam, ironically enough. But he's come out and made the claim, but with evidence. I've read this report. It's really interesting that essentially video games are losing the war for attention. The biggest markets in terms of players are spending less time playing games than they were, and they're spending more time on social media, among other factors. But I think this is concerning. As someone who, I won't go on a tangent, but recently I replayed Pokemon Diamond, which came out in 2006. And what I realized very quickly was, God, games nowadays have almost too much respect for your time, because everything is so instantaneous and quick, and there's no slow burn anymore. It feels like reports like this are saying that even despite these changes in game design, games are still losing because they're not as instantaneous as scrolling.
Yeah. I mean, the attention economy is a very real thing. I'd be interested to see how many people on social media are following game content. Like, I have recently been listening to a whole series that is just a group of people describing the narrative of the entire Remedyverse. I'm just doing that in order. It's called Lore Dump, if anybody's interested in it. But like, that's me on social media.
A fellow connoisseur of the 6-hour video essay on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's what we like to see. That fuels my work. Like, everything that I do is fueled by But I
Videos.
don't think that the general population are not playing video games because they're watching Remedy lore dump videos. Regrettably, maybe they should be.
Yeah, no, but there's a lot a lot of people watch Twitch rather than play the game. Essentially, I wonder how much of no, I don't imagine that this completely offsets it, but I do wonder how much of the people that are interested in games and the time they're losing is then spent still watching game content on social media, like as it becomes just like a thing you're interested in, not necessarily a thing you play.
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
No, neither do I. That is a good point, though. The consequence for publishers and developers, though, with that is that they can't monetize the time that people are. Well, Nintendo used to. If anyone remembers the Nintendo Creator Program from, it feels odd saying like 2014 back in the day, but yeah, when Nintendo were, for anyone who doesn't know, Nintendo used to have a program where if you made a video about a Nintendo game on YouTube, they'd essentially cream a lot of the income from it, take it themselves, and give the creators back a certain amount. And it took a lot of backlash for people for that to be reversed. But maybe we'll end up back in that situation.
Maybe.
But anyway, to keep things rapid, we'll wrap up there.
Yeah.
Thank you, as always, for tuning in to today's episode of the Weekly Download. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to stay in the loop. Episodes every Friday, so you can get a quick summary of some of the biggest stories of the week. Now, if you're someone who'd rather read your news or you're interested in reading and listening, I wouldn't recommend doing it at the same time. But you can subscribe to the Weekly Download newsletter, which is available again on Friday, every Friday via LinkedIn. And if you want even more stories, if you want to stay abreast of everything that's going on day to day, Monday to Friday, we also have the Big Games Machine daily download, which you can sign up for. In the description, you get the latest stories delivered to your inbox, to your email every Monday to Friday. But that's everything from us today. Thank you, Alex, for gracefully giving up your hosting seat and returning to the lowly position of the co-host role. No, you can. I think you'll. The way you've been performing, you'll be getting a promotion soon. But thank you so much for joining me today, Alex. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with more stories and trends, and we'll catch you then.